So this spot here on the corner of Pembridge Road and Notting Hill Gate was the location of the toll gate which gave the area its name. Notting Hill Gate was literally a toll gate on the road.
Ready, Tone? Let's go.
On the western approach to London. I mean, there's so many people around here. Today's going to be challenging, right? The Gate Cinema. That was a great cinema, I imagine it still is. It used to do a repertory programme once upon a time. I don't know if it still does or not, but I haven't been there for a few years, but it was always a very memorable place to go. Notting Hill Gate, famous for its carnival, its culture, its fantastic culture, and sadly for its really cheesy Hugh Grant film by that name, Notting Hill. I rewatched that recently. It's not stood up well to the test of time. Some of you might think it was pretty rubbish in the first instance, but certainly it does not stand up to a repeat viewing. But actually, a lot of those things are incidental. We're not here for any of that. We're here to explore. It's quite fantastic topography. We're here to walk the Campden Hill Spur. Yes, we're going Notting Hill walking. Do you like that line? Notting Hill walking. We're going to walk around this spur of land which goes from Notting Hill to Campden Hill. Look, you can see it over there. And they're actually really high points of land. I'll put the actual heights here, but Notting Hill is something like 80 feet high, and Campden Hill, I imagine you say Camden Hill, don't you? But Campden Hill is over 100 feet high, like 120 feet high. And they're part of a system of spurs. I got this, by the way, from a wonderful book called Secret London, from the suggestion, and I think it was on Twitter, asking me about the Islington Spur. And I'd never thought of that bit of land there in Islington as a spur, which of course it is, a spur of the Northern Heights. And the author, and I think his name's Andrew Duncan, says there are 4 such spurs in London which separate the river valleys of the 7 rivers that run north of the Thames. I'll pop the names up here. See if you can do them in your own head from east to west, from the Lee in the east. So the most western one is the Counters Creek. Obviously most of them are buried. Counters Creek is buried, the Westbourne is buried, etc., etc. And these spurs sit between them, and on either side you've got these river valleys. So I'm going to walk this western spur. This is the most western spur, what Andrew Duncan calls the Campden Hill Spur. It's going to be a great walk. Obviously we'll take in some of the sort of heritage type locations along the way, but not too many of them. I'm not going to go to the bloody Travel Bookshop, okay? The Hugh Grant one. That is an aberration. Onwards. I nearly missed this little passageway here, which is the way we need to go. Of course, Notting Hill has become one of London's most fashionable and sought after areas. You already know this, don't you? But of course, that hasn't always been the case. Like in the 60s, it was the centre of kind of bohemian London. It's where sort of like bohemian intellectuals and artists and musicians and people like that came to live. Because in the 50s, it had been kind of pretty run down. It got run down, I guess, during the war, maybe just before the war, and it was where a lot of immigrants from the Caribbean lived in very poor quality housing. It became synonymous with kind of like slum landlords. Who was it? Was it Rackman was one of the sort of most famous slum landlords, and people were piled up in great numbers in these houses that were in terrible condition. And that resulted in a degree of tension, and that sort of became what the area sort of became, I would say, pretty unfairly known for. And that's why I think, you know, the Notting Hill Carnival, which I've attended a number of times, is an amazing celebration. It's an amazing celebration, but sometimes all people focus on is the occasional bit of trouble, which if you're going to get several 100,000 people in one place, there will be a little bit of bother. I mean, how many football fans does it take to get in one place to cause a bit of bother? At Wycombe Wanderers, there used to be a bit of bother with a few hundred, so. And it's from sort of like the 1980s onwards that you get this version of Notting Hill, the very she version of Notting Hill, which is now really, I mean, you got to be pretty wealthy to live in Notting Hill now. Although there are still there's a bit of social housing still here, not much though. The Notting Hill Housing Trust came out of that whole upheaval around the poor housing situation. But now it is for very, very wealthy people. And of course, Portobello Market, which is where I think all the people around the tube station were heading to Portobello Market. I'm going to warn you now, I may not go there. I probably won't go there because I want to stick to the Spur and walk the Spur, apart from one place I'm going to go to, which is a very famous film location, and it's got nothing to do with Hugh Grant. Some of you will have guessed. Some of you will be disgusted with me if I don't go there. Turning now left into Ladbroke Road, which takes its name, and Ladbroke Grove, from the banker who developed this area in the 1840s. We'll talk a little bit more about what it was immediately before that, but as you can probably imagine, like a lot of areas around London, it was a rural area on the west side of London. Got a wonderful Aubrey Mews here. There are quite a few muses around this area. I believe we've collectively talked about the origins of the word muse before, haven't we, in the comments. It's always really good. A little part of me doesn't want to, well, I'll get it wrong again, won't I? But I know someone pointed out the origin is in falconry, a place where would keep falcons. But as you can see, look, this was built in 1878, so clearly falcons weren't being kept here then. It was more like a stables, I guess. It's really beautiful, isn't it? Look at the really beautiful curves and lines of this block of flats here. They look like, what, from the 20s, 30s? Lovely bit of Art Deco, eh? How wonderful. There are multiple music associations with this area, as you would expect. Obviously, there was a lot of music that came out of the Caribbean community that was here, and then you had all the kind of like the hippies and stuff that came in the 60s. And so you get a lot of prog rock associations with here. Did Hawkwind have some sort of link to this area? I feel like they did. And then you get, I know it's not prog rock, but there's a Van Morrison song, which I believe on Astral Weeks, where he talks about walking through Notting Hill. Who else writes songs about this area? Obviously the Clash are heavily associated with this neck of the woods, but I associate them more with the West Way than you. And I'm sure in the comments there'll be loads of them. I think there's a Blur reference to this area. I don't count that as much because that's that's from like the 90s, wasn't it? When it's a little, you know, it's not as, you know, it's post cool, I think, by that point. Now we're turning into Ladbroke Terrace and heading towards that large private garden ahead of us. So here are the private gardens of Ladbroke Square, which are a real feature of the development over here. I think it was mimicked elsewhere, but I think this is one of the areas where it was kind of pioneered, this idea of building the houses around these shared private gardens. It's mad to think what this area would have been like in the 50s and 60s, where you got these houses here which are worth literally millions of pounds, would have been full of people. There have been so many people living in these places. It would have been a completely different scene, and it's so out of sync with what it's become, isn't it? It would be a wonderful moment to kind of witness. And now we turn into Ladbroke Grove, and we're climbing Notting Hill here. We're actually walking up the actual hill itself. What's interesting, I've got Ed Glinnett's London Compendium, which has got some wonderful notes on the area, but no one actually talks about the origin of the name, something I'll have to look up. The actual origins of the name are a little bit obscure. It could be Notting Hill. Notty Hill is in the old records as well. But nothing enticing or exotic. But it does go back at least to the 14th century anyway, as a rural manor of the county of Middlesex, the now obsolete county of Middlesex. Just going to slightly break the route and go down here into Stanley Crescent. One, because it's, look how beautiful it is, but two, it also really reveals the topography of this area, of this spur, these two hills. The rivers that we're talking about around here are to the west it's the Countess Creek, buried now, and to the east the Westbourne, both of which I intend to walk. I was thinking of walking the Westbourne today, I hadn't done quite enough research and I would have made lots of mistakes, so there's not a lot of point. Back on Ladbroke Grove now. So we're just on the north side of the summit of Notting Hill, and we're looking down into a hollow there that was once known as Notting Dale. And Notting Dale was an area known for its brickworks and its piggeries, mostly inhabited by Irish immigrants, who I believe went on then to, a lot of them went on to work on the early years of the sewage system and the London Underground. It's featured in one of the Ben Aronovich books. I think it's Lies Sleeping. There's a really wonderful part of the story which deals with Notting Dale. At one point, there were 3 times more pigs than people in Notting Dale, which is wonderful. And there was a little bit of kind of public concern over this, and when the authorities came to get rid of some of the animals, apparently the locals responded by making bricks from pig excrement and throwing them at the authorities who were coming to get their animals, which is a really so that's quite a picture, isn't it? It's quite an interesting image. But Notting Dale now that's the land of the Notting Hill Carnival, and going up towards Portobello Road. Interesting fact, I can't remember where I read this now, I think I read it somewhere this morning, is the Ladbroke Grove, which we're looking at here as it runs all the way north. It runs all the way up to Kensal Town, Kensal Green, and it's one of the longest roads in London, which is interesting, isn't it? So you've got Caledonian Road, would be a candidate, must be others, Walworth Road maybe. Right, we're going to cross over to Landsdowne Crescent, partly to explore the western side of the spur, but also because there's a very notorious address over there. So number 22, Landsdowne Crescent over there, was once the Samarkand Hotel. And this is where Jimi Hendrix died on the 18th of September 1970. He drank quite a lot of red wine, took a couple of sleeping pills, and passed away in the most unpleasant of circumstances. Interesting, there's nothing on the building, isn't it? You think there would be something to mark his association with this address. Maybe they don't want that association. I think there's an address in central London where he lived, isn't there? Is it Conduit Street? So we'll just go around to the western side of Landsdowne Crescent, so we can see west from this high point, from this Notting Hill on the Campden Hill Spur. It's already been an incredible walk. So in the 1830s, only for 4 years, the land around the base of this hill was a racetrack known as the Hippodrome. Apparently, obviously, racing, horse racing, attracted quite an insalubrious crowd. I think Charles Dickens makes reference to the people that gathered here for the racing, but it was quite a big thing for a while. For 4 years, it was quite a big success. But apparently, around Notting Dale, the going was a bit tough for the horses, so they had to knock it on the head eventually. Which is when they developed the estate in the 1840s and built all these beautiful houses. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Horse racing around here. The thing that's still here from that period of time is the church in the middle of the square. Look. One of the really nice features of this area, of this walk, is the amount of trees that are here. It's incredibly green. It also slightly obscures the view. We would have a great view west from here, from this high ground. We're looking down into the valley of the Counters Creek here. As you can see, the low ground on the western side. So this is the western edge of the spur. What we're going to do now actually is go to a fantastic film location. Someone suggested to me recently that I should do a walk that linked together film locations, and there was one film location that sprang instantly to mind for me that I would go to, and it's the one we're going to go to now. And in a lot of ways, I wouldn't say it's the only film location I'm interested in London. I've made a whole video about going to Beckton for, to visit the site of Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. It's pretty quirky though, isn't it? The Vietnam was over there in East London. This is one of my favourite London film locations. Maybe it's my favourite. Let's wait till we get there. despite my best intentions, our route to the film location does take us across Portobello Road. I suppose in a way I have to include it, don't I, really? Portobello Road Market, it's the centre of London's antiques trade. And what I didn't realise actually, that this antiques market only moved here after the Second World War with the closure of the Caledonian Market. When I went up to the clock tower about a month or so ago, we had a lot of kind of antiques and collectibles being sold, and when they shut that down, it came over here to Portobello Road. What was interesting is the original market here was a horse market that was set up in the 19th century. Before that, it was just a little country lane linking Kensal Green to Kensington Palace. It is rather chock-a-block down there. Okay, this isn't the film location I was coming to, but I can't completely ignore it, can I? The Notting Hill Travel Bookshop, made famous by Hugh in that, as I said, that movie that just does not stand up to repeat viewing. Even so, we can't ignore it, there it is. I don't know if that is the original location or not, actually. I'm sure someone will tell us in the comments. I'm so uninterested, I can't be bothered to look it up. Thing is, it's not even a travel bookshop, it's like a really tacky souvenir shop, which is probably what it should be, really, isn't it? I don't know. I'm going to upset somebody with that comment. Although it's obscured by the market here, look at that, it's the wonderful electric cinema. What a beautiful, beautiful building it is. I think now it's kind of like a boutique cinema. It's a really wonderful building, that, isn't it? So we're just going to go up the side of this pub here, up Talbot Road, beside the distillery, and that is going to take us to our notable film location, proper film location. This is Colville Houses. So we're going to go down Colville Square, and our location is just around the corner. I just stopped to pick up a copy of the Financial Times, which on a Saturday is an absolute monster. That's why I haven't got it in my hand here, because it's a beast of a thing. It costs £4.50. But the reason I stopped to get it today is because the brilliant Ian Sinclair, who loyal viewers of this channel will know from making his multiple appearances in my films, is that he's written a big feature about the Olympic legacy, and he gives a lovely mention to the videos on this channel, to myself and the work on this channel, of which you are part. So that's a really lovely thing to see in the Financial Times, mentions of these YouTube videos and these walks, which is really lovely. I'll try and put like a shot of it in here somewhere. Thanks, Ian. And Ian may be appearing in a video in the next couple of months, I hope. Where are we? Where are we? Right, up here is a location, and oddly, it's a place that Ian has talked about. So here it is, one of the great London film locations. Have you guessed which film it is yet? It's the brilliant Donald Cammell, Nick Roeg film Performance, starring Mick Jagger and James Fox, Edward Fox. I'll put the right Fox on the screen, one of the Fox brothers. It is such a really peculiar film, but it's also a great film. I would say it's one of the greatest London films, and kind of almost definitive of that era. It's a kind of peculiar plot. It's basically a plot that revolves around a gangster played by James Fox, who's on the run, and he overhears someone talking about this place, a vacant flat here. So he just turns up, he thinks that's a good place to hide, Powis Square, Notting Hill. And in the film, as he comes into Powis Square, a track plays that was composed by Ry Cooder called Powis Square. If you Google Powis Square, you'll get the Ry Cooder track. And basically he just blags his way in, not before walking past number 23, number 24, where a couple of hippies walk out of the house carrying a bottle of milk and a cauliflower. That is such a beautifully hippie 1970s, late 60s, 1970s, 1969. I'll put the correct date on the screen. I know some of you get a little bit annoyed about my inability to retain such facts, but you know, live with it. And so he just kind of inveigles himself into the inhabitants of the house, and it's inhabited by a rock star played by Mick Jagger, Marianne Faithfull, is it, or Anita Pallenberg? Anita Pallenberg plays his sort of girlfriend, and basically it then becomes a kind of like quite psychedelic, quite trippy experience with a gangster, this sort of simmering, violent gangster, and this uneasy relationship with Mick Jagger, and they kind of like fuse. They become sort of fused characters. They sort of adopt this sort of gangstery character, and I think they dress him up at one point. He ends up taking lots of these kind of drugs. There's party scenes, there's all sorts of cavorting around. And reading Ed Glinnett's account of it in here, he talked about actually how when the movie studio saw it, they were really shocked, because of the cavorting, the taking of substances, and the violence and the violent language. And where Ian Sinclair enters into the story is, I remember Ian Sinclair talking about that the dialogue coach on the film for the gangster, the character of the gangster, was David Litvinoff, who had been an associate of the Cray twins. So he knew a little bit about gangster patter firsthand. And yeah, that's the exterior. The interiors were shot at a house in Belgravia, by the way. It's been a while since I've seen it. I kind of want to watch it now. I'm careful about recommending it to you, because I know some of you might be a little bit maybe not as broad-minded as me. So if you feel like you're a little bit squeamish, maybe don't watch it. If you feel like, yeah, I'm up for something a bit unusual, that's it. It took 2 years to get it released. Such were the, you know, the reaction in the studio, heavily edited. Right, we need to actually return to Notting Hill, the actual hill itself, continue our Campden Hill Spur walk. So we've got another hill yet to climb. We're only halfway there. So these houses here in Kensington Park Road, this was at the centre of the notorious slum landlord Peter Rackman's empire. So at one point in the 50s, this area here was sort of almost synonymous with the idea of the slum landlord like Rackman. It's interesting, isn't it? Now they're worth millions of pounds. And you can see here how we're going uphill now. We've dropped down the hill into Notting Dale, and now we're walking back up the hill to the top of Notting Hill. And we're going to drop down to Holland Park Road and then up Campden Hill. So we're back on Ladbroke Grove and dropping down the other side of Notting Hill. Yeah, and look at, again, look how green it is. Isn't it wonderful? So we're crossing Holland Park Avenue. As we get a few kind of spots of rain, maybe I'll need to shelter somewhere for a short amount of time. So we're going to turn off Holland Park Avenue and up Aubrey Road here, which you can see is really steep. And we're climbing Campden Hill. I've been pronouncing the P to distinguish it from Camden Town, but it's probably pronounced the same. This is 124 feet high. I've never really thought of this part of London as being hilly. And you might think that's a bit foolish given that we've just been walking around Notting Hill, but I've always tend to think of the hilly parts of London as being in the north, you know, around Hampstead, Highgate, and then the areas around the south. You know, you've got the obvious big hills there around Herne Hill and down to Crystal Palace. But these are not insubstantial hills. When you walk around Notting Hill and this part here of Holland Park, you really see the topography. I've noticed that every time I've come over here, I've been over a few times for the wonderful Portobello Film Festival when I've screened films, and I've always thought, I really want to come back and unpick that. But I usually thought it would be to walk one of the lost rivers, or in this case it would be the Counters Creek, I guess. And I do intend to walk the Westbourne, but it's good just to do this hill walk. So at the top of the hill is this enormous great house here. This is Aubrey House, that once had its own farm in these grounds here. And apparently one of the owners of Aubrey House, or even perhaps even the builder of it, I think it dates back to the 18th century, was quite an eccentric lady. I don't know what made her eccentric, but it says so in Andrew Duncan's book, so I'm going to take it on face value. Apparently Aubrey House does have a secret walled garden, which is incredibly enticing, isn't it? The only place it can be seen from, though, is inside the house, within the grounds itself, so it will remain a secret. And here we have some very helpful information. Aubrey House stands on the site of Kensington Wells, an early 18th century spa. There you go. Former residents include Sir Edward Lloyd Richard, first Earl Grosvenor, and Lady Mary Coke. That's the lady they reckon was eccentric, who was a diarist. There you go. And here we can look back to the spire of St John's there. That sits at the top of Notting Hill there, the church. So we're looking across, and there's a little valley in between. Not a river valley though. The river valleys are either side of us, east and west. Look at this amazingly beguiling building. Beguiling because it looks really old and it's covered in, what is that, ivy? Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. I wonder if this is part of Aubrey House. This is Aubrey Walk. It's got a beautiful mystery about it, hasn't it? And this is my second favourite cultural association of the day. This is where Dusty Springfield, the great singer, lived between, what does it say, I'm short-sighted, so I'll put the dates on the screen. I think Dusty Springfield has an association with High Wycombe. If she wasn't from Wycombe, she lived there for a while. I think she might have been born in Wycombe. Well, isn't this a really beguiling building? I love that staircase, the way it runs up the outside of the building. It's really quirky. Mention Dusty Springfield, potentially having a link to Wycombe or coming from Wycombe. And look, it's what looks like a new development here. It's called Wickham Square. I wonder why. It's not common to see the word Wycombe around London. You do get a few around West London, but I wonder what the link is. And just back here on the left, you have the Lawn Tennis Club, and their tennis courts are built on top of a reservoir, a covered reservoir that was built in 1810 by the West Middlesex Water Company. So now we come on to Campden Hill Road, and we're just now walking across the summit of the hill, I guess, and this is the southern part of the spur that we've been walking around today. We have the Windsor Castle pub over there on the top of the hill, and apparently when it was built in 1837 you could indeed see Windsor Castle from this point here. Impossible now, of course. I don't think it will come out on my camera because my lens isn't long enough. But right at the end of the street here, well, at the end of the street here, but in line with the end of the street, is the top of the BT Tower. I'm not sure I'm that impressed by that fact, to be perfectly honest with you. I'd be far more impressed by being able to see Windsor Castle, but it's there. Andrew Duncan mentions it in the book. And after the Windsor Castle, you can sense that we are indeed sort of descending now. We're coming down. It's a lot more gentle descent than the descent from Notting Hill, even though this hill is indeed steeper. Maybe it just gradually goes down towards Kensington. What you can do at this point is go along Campden Hill and into Holland Park to take in the western edge of the spur. I think I'm actually just going to carry on down the hill straight to Kensington, I think. That house over there was once inhabited by Ford Maddox Ford, who again is more of somebody that I've heard about via Ian Sinclair than one of my own references. I'm going to be honest with you, but I do know he wrote an important book about London that Ian's talked about. I will put the title of the book on the screen here, if I can find it. Okay, so this point where you feel the steep descent of the hill, yeah, this is quite dramatic, and I'm glad I'm stuck to the hill to experience this aspect of it. I'm a big believer in going with the vibe of the walk. Feel what you feel. I remember, actually, to mention Ian Sinclair again, is obviously on my mind, A, because of performance, B, because the FT, that wonderful article he wrote, which mentions me and these videos in it, which is great. But Ian said a great thing when we did that walk last summer in Tilbury, and we missed out a number of heritage locations, and I was a bit like, oh, we haven't included this, we haven't included that. And he went, no, the walk is the walk. What we're doing now, that's the walk, not what you think you should mention. And that's very true. So although Andrew Duncan does include a loop through Holland Park, I slightly feel that is partly, is important, I suppose, taking that western side, but it's also to elongate that walk. Whereas I've deviated quite a lot and gone up Portobello Road, up to Powis Square and done all of that. So it feels right to me just to head straight down the hill. I want to get that feeling. Look at this street here, Observatory Gardens. Look at those houses. The only time I've really lived in West London for any length of time was when I lived in South Kensington for about 6 months, and it was one of the periods of my life when I was the most broke. I had the least amount of money. I could just about get through the week, pay the rent. We had a room in what had been a hotel and was now just rented out room by room, and you shared a kitchen and a bathroom. And that was it, you know, and it was a very kind of hand-to-mouth existence in a lot of ways. We just were doing various part-time jobs. But what was great was when I wasn't working, I would just wander up around the streets between South Kensington and Notting Hill. And I think once or twice I went to the Gate Cinema. And it was actually quite good to be living in an area with such opulence if you're going to be completely broke. It was quite lovely to walk around these streets and at least experience it from street level, you know. Fond memories of that. It was a good place to be broke. You could see the land falling away on the eastern side of the hill here along Holland Street. So that would be the eastern descent, southeastern descent of the Campden Hill Spur. We're carrying on down Campden Hill itself. So Campden Hill Road brings us out into High Street Kensington. I haven't been down here for a while. And that is actually the end of the walk. This is where it ends, where the Campden Hill Spur comes to an end down here on High Street Kensington. Well, what a wonderful walk that was. I've been wanting to do that for about over a year since it was recommended to me on, I think it was Twitter, so thank you to whoever recommended the Islington Spur walk to me. And consequently got this book here, Secret London by Andrew Duncan. Recommend it if you can find a copy. I got this for £1, I think. I'm not sure if it's still in print, but I highly recommend it. Thank you to Andrew Duncan. I should recommend people pay the full price for this book if it's available. So that was a real treat. I really enjoyed that. Not my natural terrain, is it, to walk around the kind of posher parts of London? So that was brilliant. I will be back over here to do the Westbourne, maybe the Countess Creek, maybe both. Not on the same day, that would be mad, wouldn't it? So, and I should give an honourable mention to Ed Glynner, you know, for his fantastic London compendium. Always useful if you're within its orbit. Great book. I know people have said it's a bit pricey and it's a bit hard to find now. So hopefully Penguin will just republish it, right? Surely. Anyway, that's the end of the walk. And as I always like to say, I look forward to seeing you on the next walk, wherever that may be. And you know, I know I say I don't know, but genuinely, sometimes I do know, and I'm just saying that because I might change my mind. But in this case, I have no idea at all. I decided to do this morning, so in the lap of the river gods.